The blade was an inch from my throat when she said my name for the first time. I did not know it yet, but that single moment would decide the fate of my entire species. My name is Aiden Cole, and 3 months ago, I was the least important person on this ship. Now I was kneeling on a cold metal floor, surrounded by creatures who could crush my skull with one hand, and the most powerful being in this part of the galaxy was staring at me like I was the only interesting thing she had seen in 1,000 years. Let me back up. I was sent to the flagship of the Caliph Dominion because nobody else wanted the job. Earth had just joined the wider galaxy, and we were the smallest, weakest, and newest species anyone had ever seen. The Caliph were not just powerful, they were ancient. They did not drink blood the way old human stories imagined. They fed on energy, on the electric spark that keeps every living mind burning. To them, a human brain was a candle in a room full of stars. Bright, but small, easy to blow out. I was our species' junior envoy. Not a soldier, not a scientist. Just a man who could speak calmly under pressure, which is apparently a rare skill among humans sent into space. The first time I saw Empress Nixthera Valkyr, I nearly forgot to breathe. She did not look like a monster. She looked like something carved from moonlight and quiet danger. Pale skin that seemed to glow faintly under the ship's lights, eyes so dark they looked like the space outside the windows, and a stillness to her that made every other person in the room seem restless by comparison. She sat on a throne that was not gold or jeweled, but simple black metal, as if she did not need decoration to prove she was in charge. When I bowed, I did it wrong. I bent too low, then not low enough, then straightened too fast. A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the court. Fanged smiles, cold eyes. I was a joke to them before I had said a single word. "You are afraid," the Empress said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried across the entire hall without her raising it at all. "Yes," I said. There was no point lying to someone who could probably hear my heartbeat from across the room. "Good," she said. "Fear means you understand where you are standing." I thought that would be the end of it, a formality, a human brought forward to be looked at, judged, and dismissed. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, her calm expression cracked into something like curiosity. "Your mind is loud," she said. I did not know what to say to that. "The Caliph learned to be quiet," she continued. "We shield our thoughts. We control our feelings until they barely exist. But you," she tilted her head, studying me the way someone studies a puzzle, "you feel everything at once. Fear, pride, even now embarrassment. It is like standing near a fire after living my whole life in ice." A noble beside her throne, a tall man with sharp cheekbones and colder eyes than the rest, stepped forward. I would later learn his name was Lord Kalis Thorn, and he would become the shadow that followed every good moment I had on that ship. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly, "the human is a curiosity, nothing more. Do not waste your attention on livestock." The word landed like a slap. I felt my face heat up, but I kept my mouth shut. I was not stupid. I knew arguing with a Caliph noble in front of the entire court was a fast way to get myself killed on my first day. The Empress's eyes moved to Thorn, and for just a second, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Livestock do not make choices, Lord Thorn," she said quietly. "This one just chose silence over defending himself, which was the smarter option. Tell me, could you say the same if our positions were reversed?" Thorn said nothing. He bowed his head, but I saw the way his jaw tightened. That was the first time I understood something important. The Empress did not like being told what to think, and somehow, in less than 2 minutes, I had become a subject she was thinking about. She dismissed the court not long after, but before I turned to leave, she spoke again. "Envoy Cole." I turned back. "You will return tomorrow, alone." It was not a request. That night, I sat in my small quarters staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of that meeting. My hands would not stop shaking, and it was not entirely from fear. The Caliph ship was unlike anything humans had ever built. The walls seemed to breathe with a soft inner light, and the air always felt slightly colder than comfortable, as if the whole vessel was built for a species that did not feel temperature the way we did. I was given quarters near the human trade delegation, a small group of engineers and diplomats trying to establish some kind of foothold in Calith space. Their leader was a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Grace Halden, who had been on the ship 3 months longer than me and had the tired eyes of someone who had learned the hard way not to trust anyone here. "You met her," Grace said the next morning, not really asking. "I did, and you are still alive. So far." Grace studied me for a long moment. "Be careful, Aiden. The Caliph do not make friends. They make investments. If she is interested in you, it is because she wants something." What could she possibly want from me? Grace shrugged. That is the question that keeps me up at night. I wanted to believe Grace was being overly cautious, but I had seen the way the court looked at me, not with curiosity like the Empress, but with hunger, or worse, amusement, like predators watching something fragile wander too close. When I returned to the throne room the next day, it was empty except for her. No court, no nobles, no guards standing at attention pretending not to listen, just Empress Nixthera Veilkir, sitting not on her throne this time, but on the steps leading up to it, looking almost relaxed, almost human. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the step beside her. I hesitated only for a second before I did. "Do you know how old I am, Envoy Cole?" "No, Your Majesty." "Older than your entire species has walked upright on 2 legs, she said, and there was no pride in her voice, only something closer to exhaustion. "I have ruled the Dominion for 3,000 years. I have outlived every friend I have ever made, every lover, every enemy who thought they could defeat me. Do you know what that does to a mind over that much time? I cannot imagine. It makes everything quiet," she said. "Every emotion dulls eventually. Joy becomes a memory of joy. Anger becomes a habit rather than a feeling. I forgot what it was like to feel something sharply, until I stood in that hall yesterday and heard your mind practically shouting with fear and pride at the same time." I did not know how to respond to that, so I said nothing, which seemed to be the right instinct around her. "You did not grovel," she continued. "Even when Thorn insulted you, you held your composure. Humans are supposed to be fragile, easily broken things. And yet here you are, sitting beside the most dangerous person in this system, and your heartbeat has barely changed." "It has changed a little," I admitted. For the first time, I saw something close to a real smile cross her face. Small, brief, but genuine. "Good," she said. "I would be disappointed if you were made of stone." Over the following days, these private conversations became a pattern. She would summon me, always alone, always in that same quiet throne room, and we would talk, not about politics, not about treaties or trade routes, but about smaller, stranger things. What it felt like to be human, what it felt like to grow old and die instead of living forever, what music sounded like on Earth, what silence sounded like when you were the only one in the room who could still feel anything. I began to understand something the rest of the court could not see. Empress Nixthera Veilkir was not just powerful. She was lonely in a way that made her isolation feel like a kind of cage, one built from 3,000 years of power that nobody dared question. And somehow, impossibly, my presence seemed to be the first crack of light she had felt in that cage in a very long time. I should have been terrified. Instead, walking back to my quarters that night, I found myself smiling, and I could not fully explain why. I did not know yet that Lord Thorn was already watching. I did not know that somewhere in the lower decks, a group of ancient nobles were beginning to whisper about the human who had caught the Empress's attention. I did not know that this quiet, careful curiosity between us would soon become the most dangerous thing on this entire ship. All I knew, as I lay awake that night, staring at the strange glowing walls of a starship built by a species older than human history itself, was this. Something had changed, and there was no going back. The knife came from behind, and I only survived because Grace shouted my name a half-second before it reached my back. I spun, catching the attacker's wrist on pure instinct, and for a moment we struggled in the narrow corridor outside the trade delegation quarters. He was Caliph, young, probably a low-ranking noble trying to prove himself, and far stronger than me. I was losing that fight badly until two of the Empress's personal guards appeared and pulled him off me like he weighed nothing at all. That was the moment I understood I was no longer just a curiosity. I was a target. "You are lucky," the guard captain said afterward, a broad-shouldered Caliph named Vorn, who rarely spoke more than necessary. "Attacks on a Dominion vessel without permission are forbidden." He acted alone. Foolishly. "Alone," I repeated, still catching my breath. "You are certain?" Vorn did not answer that, which told me everything. I did not tell the Empress about the attack. I planned to keep it quiet, to handle it the way I imagined a careful diplomat should, calm and controlled. But of course, in a place where minds could be read if you knew how to listen, secrets did not stay secret for long. She summoned me within the hour. "You were attacked," she said the moment I entered the throne room. No greeting, no formality, just cold, sharp focus. "It was handled." "That is not what I asked." I studied her face, trying to read whether this conversation was heading toward concern or anger. With her, it was often difficult to tell the difference until it was too late. "Yes," I admitted. "I was attacked. Your guards intervened." Something dangerous flickered behind her eyes. Not at me, through me, toward whoever had ordered it, because I was now certain someone had. "Tell me exactly what happened." I did, in careful detail, and as I spoke, I watched her expression shift from controlled calm into something colder and more focused than I had seen from her before. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "There are members of my court," she said slowly, "who believe that my interest in you is a weakness. They believe an Empress who speaks with a human as an equal has forgotten what she is. They are wrong. But they are also dangerous because they believe they are protecting the Dominion by removing you." Removing me sounds like a polite way of saying killing me. "Yes," she said simply, no comfort in her voice, only honesty. "That is exactly what it means. I should have asked to leave. I should have requested transfer back to Earth, back to safety, back to a life where nobody wanted to put a blade in my back over a conversation. Instead, I found myself asking a different question entirely. Why does it matter to you? My safety, I mean. You are the Empress of an entire star system. I am one human envoy. There will be others." She looked at me for a long time before answering, and when she did, her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "Because you are the first thing in 3,000 years that I have wanted to protect simply because I wanted to, not because duty demanded it." I did not have a response to that. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Over the following weeks, the court around me grew colder and more watchful. I learned to walk certain corridors only with Grace or one of the human delegation beside me. I learned which nobles smiled at me out of genuine curiosity and which ones smiled the way a predator smiles at something it has already decided to eat later. Lord Thorn remained the most obvious threat, always present at the edges of every gathering, always watching with those sharp, calculating eyes. He never threatened me directly. He was too careful for that. Instead, he worked in whispers, planting doubt among the older nobles, reminding them of ancient Caliph law that forbade rulers from forming close bonds with lesser species. "He is building a case against her," Grace told me one evening, after she had spent hours listening carefully to the murmurs of the trade delegation staff, who overheard court gossip. "Not against you specifically, against her judgment. If enough nobles believe she has been compromised by human influence, they could challenge her right to rule." "Can they actually do that? Challenge an Empress?" Grace's expression was grim. "Caliph succession has never been peaceful. If the old families believe she is weak, they will act. And Aiden, you are the easiest excuse they have ever been given." I carried that warning with me into my next meeting with the Empress. I found her standing at a viewport overlooking a dying red star, her expression distant. "I need to ask you something," I said carefully, Am I putting you in danger simply by existing near you? She turned to face me, and for once, there was no mask of calm control on her face, only tired honesty. Yes, she said. Then maybe I should leave. Return to Earth. Let this go quiet before someone gets hurt. Is that what you want? I opened my mouth to say yes, that it was the safe answer, the smart answer, the answer any reasonable diplomat would give. Instead, what came out was the truth. No, I said, but I do not want to be the reason you lose everything you have built over 3,000 years. She crossed the distance between us slowly, and for the first time since I had met her, she reached out and gently touched the side of my face. Her hand was cool, almost unnervingly so, but her touch was careful, deliberate, nothing like the predator I had been warned about. Let me tell you something about my kind, she said quietly. We do not simply feed to survive. Feeding for us is intimacy. It is trust given freely, never taken by force from someone unwilling. My court fears that I have grown weak because I speak with you as an equal. What they do not understand is that strength is not the absence of feeling. Strength is choosing what matters to you and refusing to let fear decide for you. And what matters to you? She held my gaze steadily. You are beginning to. I felt something shift in my chest, warm and terrifying all at once. This was not politics anymore. This was not a diplomat managing a delicate relationship between two species. This was something far more personal and far more dangerous. That night, Grace found me staring out at the stars from the observation deck, lost in thought. You have feelings for her, she said. It was not a question. I did not deny it. There was no point. Aiden, do you understand what you are risking? Not just your life. The entire relationship between Earth and the Dominion could hang on whatever happens between you two. If this goes wrong, it will not just be you who suffers. I know, I said. I have thought about that every single day. And I still cannot stop thinking about her. Grace sighed, running a hand through her hair, the exhausted gesture of someone carrying far too much responsibility. Then be careful, please. For all our sakes. I promised her I would try. But promises are easy to make in quiet moments, staring at stars, far from the danger waiting in the halls below. The real test came only a few days later, when Lord Thorn finally decided that whispers were no longer enough. I was walking alone through a lower corridor, having stayed later than usual after a private conversation with the Empress, when the lights along the passage dimmed unexpectedly. I felt it before I saw it, a presence stepping out from the shadows ahead of me, blocking my path entirely. Thorn, Envoy Cole, he said smoothly, his voice carrying none of the usual court politeness. Walking alone this late. Careless. I was under the impression this ship was safe for guests of the Empress. Guests, perhaps, he said, stepping closer. But you are becoming something else entirely, are you not? A distraction, a weakness she cannot afford. If you have a problem with me, take it up with her. His expression darkened. I intend to. But first, I wanted to see for myself what exactly she finds so fascinating about a creature as fragile as you. The air around him seemed to grow colder, and I realized too late that this was not simply a conversation. Thorn's eyes had shifted, darker, sharper, hungrier than before. I took a step back instinctively, my heart pounding. Do not worry, he said, almost gently, in a way that made it far more frightening. I will be quick. I turned to run, but he was faster, far faster than any human, and within a heartbeat, his hand closed around my arm with bruising force. Let him go. The Empress's voice cut through the corridor like a blade. Thorn froze instantly, releasing my arm as if it had burned him. I stumbled back, breathing hard, as Nyxthera stepped out of the shadows behind him, her expression colder and more furious than I had ever seen it. Your Majesty, Thorn began, you were simply attempting to murder my guest in a darkened corridor, she said, her voice deadly calm. Do not insult me by pretending otherwise. The temperature in the corridor seemed to drop several more degrees. I watched frozen, as an energy I could not fully explain rippled visibly through the air around her, bending the light itself. "This is exactly the weakness the old families feared," Thorn said, though his voice trembled slightly now. "A ruler who would threaten one of her own nobles over a lesser species." "He is not lesser," she said, "and you are no longer welcome in my presence until you have learned the difference between loyalty and arrogance." Thorn's jaw tightened, but he bowed stiffly and retreated into the shadows without another word, leaving the two of us alone in the dim corridor. The Empress turned to me immediately, her cold fury melting into visible concern. "Are you hurt?" "I am fine," I said, though my voice shook slightly. "Thank you." She studied me carefully, as if checking for herself that I was truly unharmed, and then, slowly, she reached out and took my hand in hers. "I cannot protect you every moment," she said quietly. "There will come a day when I am not close enough to stop them. I know. And yet you are still here. And yet I am still here," I agreed. She looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her dark eyes, and then, gently, she guided my hand toward her own neck. "If you truly trust me," she said softly, "then trust this too. Let me show you what feeding truly means among my kind. Not violence, not danger, only trust, given freely." My heart pounded as I looked at her, understanding the weight of what she was offering. This was not a threat. This was an invitation into the deepest intimacy her culture understood. I nodded. What followed was nothing like the horror stories humans told about vampires. There was no pain, no violence, only a strange, warm pull, like sharing something precious rather than losing something vital. When it was over, she rested her forehead gently against mine, both of us breathing unsteadily in the dim corridor. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For choosing to trust me, even after everything you have seen tonight." I realized, standing there in that quiet corridor, with danger still fresh in the air around us, that I had fallen for a woman who could end my life with a single whispered command. And somehow, impossibly, that terrified me far less than the thought of losing her. The summons came at dawn, delivered by a guard whose face told me everything before he even spoke a single word. "The Council of Old Blood has called for a formal hearing," he said. "You are required to attend." I had heard of the council before, mentioned only in passing by Grace, and a few nervous whispers among the trade delegation staff. It was an ancient body of Caliph nobles, older even than the Empress's own line, with the authority to challenge decisions made by the throne itself. They rarely convened. When they did, it was never good news. "What is this about?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "You," the guard said simply, and walked away without further explanation. Grace met me outside my quarters, her face pale with worry. "This is what Thorn has been building toward, a formal challenge. If enough of the old families vote against her judgment, they can strip certain powers from her rule, or worse. Worse than losing power? They can demand a trial," Grace said quietly. "An old Caliph custom. If they believe the Empress's judgment has been compromised, they can demand she prove her fitness to rule through combat, or through the removal of whatever they believe has compromised her." My stomach turned cold, meaning me. Grace did not answer, which was answer enough. The hearing was held in a massive chamber I had never seen before, circular and vast, lined with rows of ancient Caliph nobles whose combined age likely stretched back further than recorded human history. The air itself felt heavy, charged with something between anticipation and hostility. I stood at the center of that circle, utterly alone, while the Empress sat upon a raised platform above us all, her expression unreadable. Lord Thorn rose first, his voice carrying easily across the silent chamber. "Honored elders," he began, "for 3,000 years, our Empress has ruled with wisdom and strength, guided by tradition and duty above all personal desire. That has changed. She has allowed herself to become entangled with a creature from a species barely a century old in galactic society, a fragile, short-lived being who cannot possibly understand the weight of what he threatens to unravel. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. I forced myself to stand still, chin level, refusing to shrink under the weight of 1,000 ancient eyes. "I present evidence," Thorn continued, "that our Empress has personally intervened to protect this human on multiple occasions, disrupting established order, punishing loyal nobles who acted in what they believed was the Dominion's best interest, and worse, that she has shared the sacred act of feeding with him, an intimacy traditionally reserved only for those bound by blood oath or eternal partnership." The murmurs grew louder. Several nobles turned to look at me with expressions ranging from disgust to fascination. "I ask the council," Thorn finished, "to formally challenge Her Majesty's fitness to rule while under the influence of this attachment, and to demand the immediate removal of the human envoy from Dominion space, permanently." Silence stretched across the chamber as the elders considered his words. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears, aware that my entire future, and possibly my life, was being decided by beings who had lived longer than entire human civilizations had risen and fallen. The Empress rose slowly from her platform, and the chamber fell utterly silent. "Lord Thorn speaks of tradition," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut steel. "Let me speak of tradition as well. For 3,000 years, I have made every decision alone. I have watched every advisor grow old and pass while I remained unchanged. I have ruled with wisdom, yes, but also with a loneliness none of you, in your endless intrigue and ambition, have ever bothered to consider." She stepped down from the platform, walking slowly across the chamber floor toward where I stood. This human did not seek power. He did not seek influence over the Dominion. He sought nothing from me at all, except honesty, which is more than I can say for anyone else in this chamber. "Your Majesty," an elder near the front interjected, an ancient-looking woman with silver eyes, "with respect, personal feeling cannot be allowed to override the safety and tradition of our people. If this bond continues, it sets a precedent that could weaken the very foundation of Kalith rule." "Then let me ask you something, Elder Vashti," the Empress replied, turning to face her directly. "What foundation are we truly protecting, if it requires an Empress to live and die entirely alone, forbidden from ever choosing anything simply because she wanted it? Is that strength, or is that merely fear dressed up as tradition?" The chamber fell into uneasy silence. I could see uncertainty flickering across several of the older faces, as if her words had struck something none of them had considered before. Thorn, sensing the shifting mood, stepped forward again. "Regardless of philosophy, Your Majesty, the Council retains the right to demand proof. If you claim this bond does not compromise your judgment, then prove it. Let the human face trial by combat against a chosen champion. If he survives, the Council will consider the matter settled. If he does not," Thorn's eyes glinted coldly, "then perhaps the Council will have its answer regardless." My blood ran cold. Trial by combat, against a Kalith champion. I had no illusions about how that would end. "Absolutely not," the Empress said immediately, her voice sharp as a blade. "Then the Council will vote to strip certain powers from your rule," Thorn said calmly, clearly having expected this exact response. "Effective immediately." The chamber erupted into fierce whispered debate. I watched helpless as centuries-old politics played out around me, my fate hanging in the balance of beings who barely acknowledged my right to speak in my own defense. "I will fight," I said. The chamber fell silent again, every eye turning toward me in surprise. "Aiden, no," the Empress said quietly, turning to face me with an expression of genuine alarm. "If this is the only way to prove that I am not some weakness to be removed," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice, despite my racing heart, "then I will face whoever they choose." "You will die," she said, quiet enough that only I could hear. "Maybe," I admitted, "but if I run from this, they will never stop hunting me, or you, or anyone connected to us. At least this way, I choose how I stand." She studied me for a long moment, something fierce and pained passing behind her dark eyes, before finally turning back to the council. "If trial by combat is truly your demand," she said, her voice cold and final, "then I will stand as his champion myself." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Even Thorn looked momentarily stunned. "Your Majesty, that is highly irregular," Elder Vashti said carefully. "Nothing in Kalith law forbids it," the Empress replied evenly. "If you question my judgment regarding this human, then let me prove it with my own strength, rather than sacrifice him to satisfy Lord Thorn's ambition." Thorn's expression darkened considerably. Clearly, this was not the outcome he had planned for. "Very well," Elder Vashti said slowly after a tense pause. "The Council will allow it. But know this, Your Majesty. Should you lose, the consequences will extend far beyond a simple political embarrassment." "I am aware," the Empress said calmly. The combat was set for the following day, held within a massive arena deep in the ship's lower decks, built centuries ago for exactly this kind of ancient dispute. I spent that night unable to sleep, pacing my quarters, terrified not for myself, but for her. Grace found me near dawn, her expression grim but resolute. "There has to be another way." "She has already chosen," I said quietly, "and I do not think anything either of us says will change her mind now." When the moment arrived, the arena was packed with nobles, eager to witness whatever unfolded. Thorn had selected his champion carefully, an ancient warrior noble named Kael Dravith, easily twice the Empress's physical size, with centuries of combat experience behind him. I stood at the edge of the arena, helpless, watching the woman I loved prepare to risk everything for my sake. The battle that followed was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Speed and power beyond human comprehension, the very air crackling with barely contained energy as they clashed again and again. I watched, heart in my throat, unable to look away even as fear threatened to overwhelm me completely. And when it finally ended, with Dravith kneeling in defeat before her, breathing hard but ultimately unharmed thanks to her restraint, I realized something with absolute clarity. She had not just won a duel. She had chosen me, publicly, permanently, in front of every ancient noble who had ever doubted her. There was no going back from this moment, for either of us. 3 warships appeared at the edge of the solar system less than a week after the duel, and Earth's entire planetary defense network went on high alert within minutes. I learned about it the same way most people did, through a frantic message from Grace that woke me in the middle of the ship's artificial night cycle. Her face on the screen was pale, exhausted, and furious all at once. "They are calling it a diplomatic escort," she said, "but 3 warships is not an escort, Aiden. It is a warning." "A warning about what?" "About you," she said bluntly. "Word of the duel reached the wider Dominion faster than anyone expected. Some of the older bloodlines outside this ship are calling it corruption. They are saying the Empress has been manipulated by a lesser species, and that Earth itself needs to be reminded of its place before this bond goes any further." My stomach dropped. This was no longer a private matter between myself and a handful of nobles on one ship. This had become something that could threaten the safety of my entire planet. I found the Empress standing alone in the observation chamber, staring out at the same distant stars she always seemed drawn to when the weight of her rule became too heavy to carry silently. "You have heard," she said without turning around. 3 warships at the edge of my solar system tend to get noticed." She turned to face me, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely afraid, not for herself, but for what her choices had put at risk. "The outer bloodlines are demanding action," she said. "They believe that if I am willing to defy tradition for a human envoy, then Earth itself represents a threat to the stability of the entire Dominion. They want assurances, guarantees that this will not spread further influence beyond what already exists." "What kind of assurances?" She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything before she spoke. "They want you gone," she said quietly, "permanently, removed from Dominion space entirely, with formal acknowledgement that our bond was a mistake, born of curiosity rather than genuine intention." If I comply, the warships withdraw peacefully. And if you do not comply, then they consider it proof that Earth has already begun corrupting Dominion leadership, she said, and they will treat your planet the way they treat any perceived threat to Calith's stability. The weight of that statement settled over me like a physical thing. This was no longer just about the two of us. This was about billions of lives on a planet that had no real way to defend itself against forces this powerful. Then I should leave, I said, the words tasting like ash even as I spoke them. If my presence here puts Earth at risk, then the only responsible choice is for me to go quietly, before this escalates any further. No, she said immediately, sharper than I expected. Nix, listen to me. This is bigger than either of us now. I cannot be the reason an entire planet gets destroyed. And I cannot simply hand you over like some offering to appease frightened old bloodlines clinging to power they no longer understand. She snapped back, her composure cracking for the first time in front of me. Do you understand what you are asking me to do? I am asking you to protect your people, I said quietly, the same way you have been protecting me this entire time. She was silent for a long moment, staring at me with an expression caught somewhere between fury and heartbreak. There has to be another way, she said finally. Grace found a possible answer 3 days later, buried deep within centuries of obscure Caliph legal precedent that even most of the ancient nobles had likely forgotten existed. There is an old law, she explained, gathering the human delegation together in a hurried meeting. Rarely used, almost forgotten, but still technically valid. If an empress formally binds herself to another through permanent, recognized union, that bond supersedes any external challenge from outer bloodlines regarding personal attachment. Marriage, essentially, in terms humans would understand it. Meaning what, exactly? I asked. Meaning if she marries you, Grace said carefully. Under full Caliph law, in front of formal witnesses, it stops being a question of temporary influence or corruption. It becomes permanent, recognized, unchallengeable. The outer bloodlines lose their legal argument entirely. That sounds too simple, I said. It is not simple, Grace corrected. No Caliph ruler has invoked that law in recorded history. Not once, in 3,000 years of Dominion rule. Which means nobody actually knows how the ancient bloodlines will react if she tries. I sat with that information for a long time after the meeting ended, turning it over in my mind again and again. This was not just a political solution. This was permanent, in the deepest sense of the word. A commitment that would tie my life to hers in ways neither species had ever fully attempted before. I thought about everything that had happened since I first arrived on this ship, the fear in that first meeting, the quiet conversations that followed, the blade at my throat, twice now, and the woman who had stood between me and death both times without hesitation. I thought about the exhaustion in her voice when she spoke of 3,000 years alone, and the way something in her seemed to soften every single time she looked at me. I found her that evening in the same observation chamber, staring out at the same distant stars, her expression heavy with the weight of decisions that could shape the future of 2 entire species. I need to ask you something, I said, my heart pounding harder than it ever had during any duel or ambush. She turned to face me, and something in my expression must have told her this was different from our usual conversations, because her own composure shifted immediately into careful attention. Grace found something, I said, my voice unsteady despite my best efforts to remain calm. An old law, almost forgotten. She says if you formally bind yourself to someone through permanent union, it ends the challenge from the outer bloodlines completely. I am aware of the law, she said quietly. I have known of its existence for centuries. I simply never imagined a reason to invoke it. And now? She studied me carefully, her dark eyes searching mine for something I could not quite name. Now is different. I took a breath, steadying myself as best I could, and stepped closer to her. I am not asking this because of politics, I said. I am not asking this to save Earth, or to end a legal challenge, or to satisfy ancient bloodlines who will never fully accept me regardless of what happens tonight. Then why are you asking? Because I have never in my life met anyone who makes me feel the way you do, I said. Because every single time you have stood between me and danger, I have realized more clearly that I do not want a life without you in it, however short or long that life turns out to be. Because somewhere between that first terrifying meeting in your throne room and this exact moment, I fell completely, irreversibly in love with you. Her eyes widened slightly, something vulnerable flickering behind them that I had never seen from her before, not even in our most private conversations. I lowered myself carefully to one knee, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for hers. Nixthera Valkyr, I said, my voice barely steady. Will you marry me? The observation chamber fell utterly silent, the distant stars outside the only witnesses to a question that could reshape the future of two entire civilizations. I watched her face carefully, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain she could hear it, even without her enhanced senses. She did not answer immediately. For a long, agonizing moment, she simply stood there, staring down at me with an expression I could not fully read, her hand still resting gently within mine. I felt the silence stretch, unbearable, filled with 3,000 years of tradition, ancient law, political consequence, and a single terrified human heart waiting for an answer that would decide everything. Yes. The word came softly, barely above a whisper, but it landed with the force of an entire star collapsing in on itself. For a moment, I was not entirely certain I had heard her correctly, until she repeated it, steadier this time, her dark eyes shining with something I had never seen in them before. Yes, she said again. I will marry you, Aiden Cole. I rose to my feet, my hands still trembling, and before either of us could say anything further, she closed the distance between us completely, resting her forehead gently against mine, the way she had once done in that dim corridor, after trusting me with something far more intimate than either of us had expected that night. Do you understand what this means? She whispered. Once this is done, there is no undoing it, not through politics, not through pressure from the outer bloodlines, not through anything short of death itself. I understand, I said. I would not have asked otherwise. Word spread through the ship faster than either of us anticipated. By the following morning, every noble in the Caliph court had heard that their Empress intended to invoke a law forgotten for 3,000 years, binding herself permanently to the very human envoy the outer bloodlines had demanded be removed entirely. The reaction was immediate and far from unanimous. Some nobles, particularly the younger ones who had grown weary of ancient traditions dictating every aspect of their lives, seemed almost thrilled by the audacity of it. Others, the older bloodlines who valued tradition above nearly everything else, reacted with outrage bordering on panic. Lord Thorne, predictably, refused to accept defeat quietly. He called for an emergency session of the council, within hours, demanding the marriage be declared illegal, invalid, a manipulation of ancient law never intended for circumstances such as these. I stood beside Nixthera once again in that same circular chamber, facing rows of ancient, watchful eyes, though this time I did not stand alone. This law exists precisely for circumstances such as these, Elder Vashti said calmly, silencing Thorne's protests before they could gain momentum. It was written centuries ago by rulers who understood that even an empress deserves the right to choose her own path, provided she is willing to accept full responsibility for that choice. Her Majesty has clearly demonstrated that willingness, repeatedly, in ways few rulers throughout our history ever have. Thorne's expression darkened considerably. This sets a dangerous precedent. What happens when the next ruler decides personal desire outweighs centuries of careful tradition? Then perhaps, Nixthera said, stepping forward with quiet authority, our traditions were never as strong as we believed, if they can be threatened simply by one ruler choosing happiness alongside duty, rather than sacrificing one entirely for the other. The chamber fell silent at that, and I watched as several of the older nobles exchanged uncertain glances, clearly reconsidering positions they had held rigidly for centuries. The law stands, Elder Vashti declared finally. The marriage will proceed under full Dominion recognition. Lord Thorn, you will withdraw your challenge or face formal censure for repeatedly attempting to undermine the authority of the throne through underhanded means." Thorn's jaw tightened, fury clearly boiling beneath his controlled exterior, but he said nothing further. He bowed stiffly, turned, and left the chamber without another word, though the look he cast toward me before departing told me clearly that this was not truly over. Not entirely. He was right, in a way, though not in the manner either of us expected. 2 days before the ceremony, as preparations were underway throughout the ship, an emergency alert tore through the corridors in the middle of the artificial night cycle. I woke to Grace pounding urgently on my door, her expression frantic. "Thorn is gone," she said breathlessly. "His personal shuttle departed hours ago without authorization. Security believes he has gone to rally support among the outer bloodlines directly, possibly with intentions of provoking exactly the conflict everyone has been trying to avoid." My blood ran cold. If Thorn succeeded in convincing enough outer bloodline nobles that this marriage represented a genuine threat, the 3 warships already stationed near Earth might not simply withdraw peacefully. They might act first, and ask questions only after the damage was already done. I found Nyxthera already awake, standing in the command chamber, studying tactical displays with fierce concentration. "He is trying to force a conflict before the marriage can be formally recognized," she said without looking up. "If he succeeds in provoking the outer bloodlines into acting against Earth before our union is complete, the marriage law will not apply retroactively. Earth would be treated as an active threat rather than a species connected to the throne through recognized bond." "We can try," she said, finally looking up at me, determination hardening her expression into something fierce and unshakable. "But it means moving the ceremony forward immediately, tonight, before Thorn has time to succeed in whatever he is attempting." There was no time for elaborate preparation, no time for the formal gathering of witnesses that ancient tradition typically demanded. Instead, within hours, the entire ship's population, human and Caliph alike, gathered hurriedly within the same circular chamber that had witnessed both the Council's challenge and Thorn's final defiant departure. Elder Vashti presided over the ceremony personally, her ancient voice carrying clearly through the tense, crowded chamber as she recited words older than human civilization itself, binding 2 lives together permanently under full Dominion law. I stood facing Nyxthera, both of us acutely aware of the urgency behind this moment, yet somehow, despite everything, finding a strange sense of calm in simply looking at each other. "Do you, Nyxthera Valkyr, Empress of the Caliph Dominion, freely choose this bond, understanding fully its permanent and unbreakable nature?" Elder Vashti asked. "I do," Nyxthera said, her voice steady and certain. "And do you, Aiden Cole, Envoy of Earth, freely choose this bond, understanding fully its permanent and unbreakable nature?" "I do," I said, my own voice somehow steadier than I expected, given everything happening around us. "Then by ancient Dominion law," Elder Vashti declared, "this union is recognized, permanent, and unchallengeable, from this moment until the ending of all things." The chamber erupted, not into celebration exactly, but into a strange mixture of shocked silence and quiet, uncertain applause from those who understood the historic weight of what had just occurred. Word reached the outer bloodlines within hours, exactly as we had hoped. The marriage, now fully recognized under ancient Dominion law, immediately invalidated any legal argument Thorn might have attempted to construct regarding corrupted judgment or improper influence. The 3 warships stationed near Earth received new orders within the day, withdrawing quietly back toward Dominion space, their mission rendered pointless by a law 3,000 years old, invoked for the very first time in recorded history. Thorn's fate, I later learned, was far less fortunate. Having openly defied direct orders from the Council and attempted to provoke conflict without authorization, he was stripped of his noble status entirely, exiled to the furthest edges of Dominion space, his ambitions ultimately costing him everything he had spent centuries building. I did not feel triumphant learning of his downfall. Mostly, I simply felt relief that it was finally over. Grace found me a week later, standing once again in that same observation chamber where I had first proposed, staring out at the same distant, endless stars. "Earth is safe," she said, settling beside me. "The Dominion has officially recognized us as connected to the throne through your marriage. No outer bloodline dares threaten a planet directly tied to their own Empress now." "I know," I said quietly. "I still cannot quite believe any of this actually happened." Grace smiled, genuine warmth replacing the exhaustion that had lived behind her eyes for months. "For what it is worth, Aiden, I am glad you did not listen to me when I told you to be careful. You were right to warn me." "I was," she agreed. "But sometimes the reckless choice turns out to be the right one anyway." She left me alone with my thoughts after that, and it was not long before Nyxthera joined me, her presence settling beside me with the same quiet calm I had grown to treasure since that very first terrifying meeting. "You are thinking about something," she said, studying my expression carefully. "Just everything that happened," I admitted. "How strange it all seems now, looking back. A blade at my throat during our very first meeting, and now here we are." "Strange," she agreed, "but not unwelcome." We stood together in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching the stars drift slowly past the viewport, before she spoke again, quieter this time, more vulnerable than I had ever heard her. "I told you once that I had forgotten what it felt like to want something simply because I wanted it, rather than because duty demanded it," she said. "For 3,000 years, every choice I made existed for the sake of my people, my throne, my responsibilities. I had convinced myself that wanting anything purely for myself was a weakness I could not afford. And now," she turned to face me fully, her dark eyes soft in a way that still occasionally caught me off guard, even after everything we had been through together. "Now I understand that choosing something for yourself, especially something as uncertain and terrifying as loving someone who could be taken from you at any moment, is not weakness at all," she said. "It is perhaps the greatest strength I have ever shown in 3,000 years of rule." I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers, feeling the same cool, steady presence that had first drawn me toward her in that very first meeting, back when I had been nothing more than a frightened, disposable envoy from a species nobody expected to matter at all. "For what it is worth," I said quietly, "you taught me something too." "What is that?" "That sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to stay small in front of something far more powerful than themselves." She smiled then, fully and freely, in a way I suspected very few beings throughout the entire history of the Calith Dominion had ever been fortunate enough to witness. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their endless, silent drift, indifferent to empires, ancient traditions, or the countless political struggles that had nearly torn apart everything we had built together. But within that quiet observation chamber, none of that mattered anymore. There was only the two of us, an empress who had ruled alone for 3,000 years, and a human envoy who had refused, against every reasonable expectation, to disappear quietly into the vast, indifferent darkness of space. Together, impossibly, permanently, we had chosen each other. And for the first time in longer than either of us could fully measure, that felt like more than enough.